Hello, everyone! Today we're going to begin with a story that might sound ordinary at first, but carries a weight that few hearts can bear. The church is quiet, too quiet. Sunlight struggles through the stained glass windows, coloring the pews with fractured reds and blues, but even those colors feel muted, as if the world itself is holding its breath. I sit in the very front row, my hands clasped so tightly together they ache, my throat raw from trying to keep the sobs inside. My husband of 42 years lies just a few steps away, inside a polished wooden coffin. His face, calm and still, wears something I cannot ignore. A smile. A faint, mysterious smile that lingers even in death, and I cannot stop asking myself why. Grief presses against my chest like an iron weight. For decades, Harold had been my anchor, my companion through storms, my safe harbor in chaos. Losing him should have felt like losing everything, yet in that moment I was haunted less by my pain and more by the unsettling serenity on his face. How could a man, on the edge of his last breath, look so peaceful, almost victorious? I stare at the flowers around his coffin, their fragrance heavy, suffocating. Mourners whisper behind me, their voices like a low tide, respectful yet detached. They remember him as a kind neighbor, a generous friend, a man of steady words. But none of them saw what I saw in his final hours. None of them noticed the quiet, secret smile. And that mystery clings to me more fiercely than my mourning veil. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. This isn't just another story. It's a journey into love, secrets, and the kind of truth that can unravel a lifetime in a single moment. I want you to comment too. Tell me, where are you right now as you hear these words? What city? What hour? Because stories like these stretch far beyond one family, one house, one grave. They belong to anyone who has ever loved and ever lost, and ever wondered if they truly knew the one they held closest. The service drags on, the pastor's voice steady but distant. I barely register the prayers, the hymns, the careful words of comfort. My focus remains fixed on Harold's lips, curved in that strange, almost defiant smile. Was it faith? Relief? A secret he carried that none of us were meant to understand? Later, when the last handshakes fade and the last condolences fall silent, I remain seated. The church empties until only the sound of my own shallow breathing echoes in the stillness. I close my eyes, and the image burns brighter. Harold, smiling in death. It is the kind of smile that demands answers. And though I don't know it yet, the answer waits for me in the most unexpected place. Not in a will, not in an old photo, but in a folded piece of paper hidden beneath the pillow where he last laid his head. A letter. A letter that will unravel everything I thought I knew about him, about us, about the life we shared. And perhaps, about why he smiled. The house felt heavier than ever when I stepped inside that night. It wasn't just the silence, though that silence cut through me like a blade. It was the weight of absence, the way every corner still carried Harold's presence, yet felt unbearably empty without him moving through it. The jacket he always left hanging on the chair was still there. His favorite mug sat on the counter, a thin ring of coffee stain at the bottom, as if he might return any moment to wash it out. I didn't want to be here alone, but it was home, and home was where the memories lived. I needed to face them, no matter how painful. My body felt drained, yet something inside me insisted I go upstairs, to our bedroom, to the place where his scent still lingered on the sheets. The air was thick, tinged with the faint smell of cologne Harold always wore. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping gently under my weight. That's when my hand brushed something odd beneath the pillow. At first, I thought it was just one of his old books, or maybe the TV remote he sometimes misplaced. But when I lifted the pillow, what I found was something else entirely. A folded envelope, yellowed at the edges, as if it had been hidden there for some time. My heart jolted. The envelope was addressed in Harold's handwriting, his neat, deliberate script, the same I'd seen on birthday cards, on notes pinned to the fridge. But this one was different. The strokes looked heavier, shakier, as though written in haste or in trembling emotion. On the front, there was no recipient's name, just one word: keep. I stared at it, my fingers trembling. Why would Harold hide a letter under his pillow, marked with such a cryptic word? Why not give it to me directly, or leave it somewhere obvious, like his desk drawer or safe? And why now? Why before his death? I pressed the letter against my chest, feeling my heart race beneath it. For a moment, I was terrified to open it. The possibilities spun through my mind like a storm. Was it a confession? A farewell? Or perhaps something darker? A secret Harold never had the courage to say aloud? The room seemed to close in on me as I slid my thumb beneath the flap. But then I froze. I couldn't do it. Not yet. I set the letter aside and let my gaze wander across the room. Every detail of our life together seemed sharper now. The photo on the nightstand of our wedding day, my white dress glowing in the sunlight, the stack of novels he never finished, the quilt we picked out together at a market years ago. And suddenly, the memory of Harold's final moments surged back with brutal clarity. The faint upturn of his lips, that enigmatic smile, the look of peace in his eyes, as if he had carried something into death that none of us could take from him. My hands returned to the envelope. It felt warm, as if it carried not just paper, but the pulse of Harold himself. I traced the edges, willing myself to be brave. If he left this letter behind, he wanted me to find it. And if he wanted me to find it, then it meant he wanted me to know. The first tear slid down my cheek before I even opened it. I thought about all the times Harold and I shared secrets over the years. Small ones, silly ones. How he once hid a stray kitten in the garage until I finally noticed. How he confessed to losing his wedding ring during a fishing trip and buying a replacement without telling me. Those were the harmless, tender secrets that made marriage both frustrating and endearing. But this felt different. This letter carried the weight of something far more profound. The question that gnawed at me was simple but merciless. Would the words inside bring me closer to him or push me further away? I inhaled deeply, the sound trembling in my throat. With one careful motion, I began unfolding the paper. Each crease revealed a little more of the handwriting. The ink faded, yet strong. And in that moment, I felt both dread and hope colliding in my chest. The house was utterly still. No wind through the windows, no creak in the walls. It was as though the universe itself was waiting with me, watching, listening, ready for the secret Harold had left behind to finally speak. And as my eyes landed on the very first line, I realized nothing in my life would ever be the same again. Sleep refused to come that night. I lay in bed with the unopened letter on the nightstand beside me, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster as though they might spell out answers. But no matter how much I tried to close my eyes, my thoughts circled back to the same place. Harold's face, his stillness, and that mysterious smile. I could see it so vividly, as though it was etched into my vision. His lips, barely parted, curved upward ever so slightly, soft but unmistakable. Not a grimace, not an accident of muscles relaxing in death. No, it was a deliberate smile, one that spoke of knowledge, of resolution. It wasn't the kind of smile you wear when you're trying to comfort someone else. It was the kind that comes when you've made peace with yourself. And that terrified me, because I had never seen him smile that way before. Not at me, not at our children, not even on the happiest days of our marriage. His smiles had always been warm, yes, gentle, reassuring. But this one was different. It carried something private, something I wasn't a part of. Almost as if, in his final moment, Harold belonged not to me, not to our family, but to another world entirely. The thought gnawed at me until I had to sit up in bed. I pressed my palms against my face, whispering his name into the darkness. "Harold, what were you smiling at?" My voice cracked under the weight of the question. The silence that followed was unbearable. I stood and wandered the house like a restless spirit. In the kitchen, I ran my hands over the table where we'd shared countless breakfasts. In the living room, I stared at his armchair, still bearing the faint imprint of his shape. Each room whispered his absence, yet each room also seemed to hold a secret, locked away in that smile. When dawn began to creep through the curtains, I returned to the bedroom and sat again at the edge of the bed. My gaze drifted to the nightstand, to the envelope waiting patiently, silently, as though it too smiled at me with some hidden knowledge. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the paper. But still, I hesitated. I wasn't ready yet. Instead, I closed my eyes and tried to recall every detail of his final day. He'd been weak, yes, but strangely calm. His breathing had slowed, his hands cool in mine, but his eyes— oh, those eyes. They had glimmered with a kind of brightness I hadn't seen in years. He looked past me, beyond me, as though he was seeing something, or someone, else. And then came the smile. The memory replayed again and again, each time sharper, until I felt as though I was standing in that moment once more. My chest tightened, my throat closed, and I clutched the sheets for support. Was it joy that made him smile? Or was it relief? Or was it love? Love for something I could not give him, something or someone hidden in the folds of that letter. The possibility made my blood run cold. I rose to my feet again, pacing in circles, my mind a storm. How could he keep something from me all these years? How could he take it with him into death, smiling, while I was left behind with questions sharp enough to wound? Yet even through the pain, there was another feeling, a faint, reluctant pull of curiosity. Perhaps the smile wasn't betrayal, but release. Perhaps it was not a sign of love lost, but of a burden lifted. What if that letter contained the answer, the truth that would let me understand? I sank back into bed, the exhaustion finally catching me. The letter remained unopened, but I clutched it to my chest as I drifted into a shallow, restless sleep. And even in dreams, Harold was there, standing at the edge of a field, sunlight on his face, that same haunting smile playing on his lips. He raised a hand, as if to wave, but no words passed between us. Only the smile. When I woke, tears clung to my cheeks. I pressed my forehead to the envelope and whispered, "I'll read it soon, I promise." But the truth was, I was still afraid. Morning light filled the bedroom when I finally found the courage. The letter lay on the nightstand, waiting for me like a test I could no longer postpone. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the paper soft from age yet heavy with significance. I stared at the word Harold had written on the front, "Keep," and whispered to myself, "All right, Harold. I'll keep it, but I need to know first." With a sharp inhale, I slid my finger beneath the flap and unfolded the paper. The handwriting leapt out at me. His handwriting, unmistakably his, though more uneven than usual, as if written in a moment of failing strength. My eyes stung as I focused on the first line. "If you are reading this, then I am already gone." I froze, my heart squeezing inside my chest. Those words struck like a bell, final and undeniable. They were not a farewell spoken aloud, but something meant only for my eyes, for my heart. I pressed forward, swallowing hard, my gaze sliding down to the next sentence. I smiled when I left this world because I finally carried no regrets. A gasp escaped me. My mind reeled back to that haunting smile on his lips. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't my imagination. He had meant it. But what regret had he carried all his life, and what had erased it at the very end? My fingers shook as I held the letter closer, afraid to miss a single word. The ink was darker in some places, as if his pen had pressed harder, like his emotions were too heavy to contain. "There are things I never told you, not because I wished to deceive you, but because I could not bear to wound you. For years, I lived with a silence inside me. Tonight, I must set it free." Tears blurred my vision. The letter trembled in my hands as I paused, fighting the urge to stop reading. Part of me wanted to tear the page in half, to throw it away before the truth could burn me. But another part, stronger, sharper, demanded to know. Harold had lived with this secret. I could not let him take it completely into the grave. I forced myself to continue. Long before I met you, I loved someone else. The words dropped like stones in my stomach. My breath caught, and I pressed the letter against my lips, as if that could muffle the sting. Another woman. Another love. Not imagined, not invented. Real. A person who had existed before me, and perhaps in ways I had never seen. Alongside me. I closed my eyes and exhaled shakily. My mind raced to every moment of our marriage, searching for cracks, for signs I had missed. Harold had never been unkind, never cold, never distant. If anything, he was steady, constant, devoted. So how could he have held this within him all along? I forced my gaze back to the paper. Her name does not matter, not yet. What matters is that she was my first great love, and losing her carved a hollow space inside me. I carried it quietly, even as I built a life with you. Do not think it made my love for you less. It only made it different. You were my home, my safe place. But she was the wound that never healed. A sob broke from my chest. The room swam around me, my body weak, as if the weight of those words pressed me down into the mattress. He had loved me. Of that, I had no doubt. But he had also loved someone else, deeply, enduringly. And he had smiled in death because he had found some form of peace with that love. I gripped the paper tighter. The temptation to stop again overwhelmed me. Yet Harold's words seemed to whisper from the page, urging me onward. If you wonder why I smiled, it was because at last I knew she had forgiven me. And in that forgiveness, I found release. The letter slipped from my fingers onto my lap. Forgiven? By whom? By this woman he had once loved? Forgiven for what? I stared at the unfinished page, the remaining paragraph still folded over. There was more, much more. But already the truth had begun to unravel everything I thought I knew about Harold, about us, about the story of our marriage. And though I was terrified of the next words, I could not stop, because the smile that haunted me finally had a voice. I held the letter tightly, as if letting it go might cause the words to vanish. My breath slowed, uneven, while my eyes scanned the next part of Harold's confession. Do you remember the way I used to stare at the sea? The letter began. It wasn't just the waves I saw. It was her face, reflected in every tide, carried back to me by every horizon. That summer, when I was 20, the ocean gave me a memory that never left. I paused, the words dragging me to a place I had never been, into a youth I had never known. Harold had never spoken of a summer like that, not once in all our years together. I tried to picture him at 20, his hair thick and black, his smile careless, his heart unscarred. And there, on some nameless shore, was a woman who had imprinted herself onto him so deeply that even decades of marriage could not erase her. I forced myself to keep reading. She appeared like a song you don't realize you've been waiting to hear. We met on a pier, her hands stained with salt from fishing nets, her laughter brighter than the gulls overhead. She wasn't like anyone I'd ever known, fearless, quick to challenge me, yet gentle in ways that disarmed me completely. We were young, yes, but youth only sharpened what I felt for her. A lump rose in my throat. I could almost hear her laughter through the ink, a sound carried across years, slipping through the lines Harold had written. I felt myself growing jealous, not of the woman herself, for she was faceless in my mind, but of the joy she had given him, a joy he had chosen not to share with me until now. The letter continued, the strokes of his pen heavier, darker. We spent nights by the docks, talking until dawn. We dreamed, foolishly, about traveling the world. I promised her things I had no right to promise, and she believed me. That belief, her trust, was the most fragile treasure I ever held, and I broke it. I shut my eyes. The pain in those words was raw, even after so many years. Harold's regret bled through the page. He had carried it with him, silently, while he built a life with me. For a moment, I lowered the letter to my lap and pressed my palms against my face. My mind rebelled. I didn't want to know this side of him, didn't want to imagine the touch of another hand in his, the sound of another woman's laughter filling his world. But the words clung to me, demanding to be read, refusing to let me turn away. I lifted the letter again. Circumstances tore us apart, family expectations, obligations I could not walk away from. I told her we would find our way back to each other, but she knew better. She said goodbye with tears, and in her eyes, I saw something that has haunted me to this day. The look of someone who knew she had given everything only to watch it slip away. A sharp ache pierced my chest. It was too easy to imagine Harold at 20, standing helpless as the woman he loved disappeared into the night. That image twisted itself into me, a sorrow that wasn't mine, yet felt like a betrayal all the same. And then, the line that froze me completely. I never forgave myself, and I don't think she forgave me either, not until the end. I stared at those words, the letters blurring through my tears. The end? Did he mean before his death? Did he mean they had crossed paths again, after all these years? My pulse quickened, the possibilities unfolding into questions too heavy to hold. I leaned back against the headboard, the paper trembling in my hands. The memories he described were not mine, yet they had shaped the man I loved, the man who had shared his life with me. In those few paragraphs, I saw the boy he once was, the wounds he carried, and the secret he had locked away under a smile. The house around me seemed to fade. I could almost feel the salt wind Harold described, hear the waves crashing on some long-forgotten shore. I imagined him standing there, young and alive, smiling, not with the haunted smile I saw in his coffin, but with the reckless joy of someone who believed love was invincible. The letter slipped in my lap as I whispered into the empty room, "Who was she, Harold? Who was she to you?" And though there was no answer, I knew the letter still had more to tell me. The letter grew heavier in my hands the further I read. Each line felt like a stone sinking into my chest, pressing me deeper into the bed. Harold's voice seemed to echo between the words, and I could almost hear him breathing as he wrote them, as if he had been sitting in this very room, knowing the weight of his confession would one day fall upon me. I tried to bury her memory. The next lines read, I tried to cover it with work, with family, with the comfort of daily life. But her absence was like a wound that refused to close. I carried it quietly, never showing you, never letting the children see. You deserved a husband who belonged to you fully. And yet, a part of me never truly did. My throat tightened. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. For years, I had believed Harold's steady love was whole, unbroken. I thought the life we built together was strong because it was free of shadows. But now I saw that he had been smiling through pain, steadying himself on the outside while bleeding within. I set the letter down for a moment, clutching the quilt at my side. Anger flickered through me, brief, sharp, and uninvited. How dare he keep this from me? How dare he let me live in the comfort of a love I thought complete, while he harbored another life in silence? But just as quickly, the anger softened into sorrow. He had kept this secret not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of hurting me, fear of unraveling the family we had built together. And so he carried the regret alone, like a hidden scar no one else could see. I picked up the letter again, my fingers shaking as I unfolded the next lines. There were moments I almost told you, on our 10th anniversary, when you asked me what I was thinking as we danced. On the night our first grandchild was born, when you fell asleep in the hospital chair beside me. I wanted to say her name, to confess that she still lived inside me. But I couldn't, because every time I looked at you, I saw the life we had built, and I couldn't bear to wound it. The words pressed against my heart like a knife. I remembered those moments clearly, our anniversary dinner, the warm glow of the hospital room. I remembered asking him what he was thinking, and how he had smiled, squeezing my hand, saying only, "Everything." Now I knew what that smile had been hiding. A hollow laugh escaped me, sharp and bitter. "You should have told me, Harold," I whispered to the empty room. "You should have trusted me enough to share the weight." But as the silence closed in, another thought surfaced. Would I have forgiven him? Could I have carried that truth with grace? Or would it have poisoned everything between us? Perhaps Harold had known the answer better than I did. Perhaps his silence had been his way of protecting me, even as it condemned him to a lifetime of regret. The letter continued, his words almost trembling on the page. "Every smile I gave you was real. Every word of love I spoke to you was true. But beneath it all, there was always the shadow of what I had lost. I lived a good life, a full life, but I lived it with one regret, that I let her go, and that I never made peace with that loss. Until now." I pressed the page to my chest and let the sobs finally come. They tore out of me in waves, shuddering through my body until I felt weak, small, and emptied. I had wanted Harold's final smile to be for me, for the life we shared. But now I knew it had been for something else, for the peace he had finally found after decades of regret. And still, I couldn't turn away. I couldn't stop reading. Because beneath the regret, I sensed there was more. Something darker, something hidden even deeper than this confession. The way his words lingered on until now made me tremble. What had changed in his final days? What had allowed him to finally let go of regret and smile as he died? I wiped my eyes, steadied my breath, and unfolded the paper once more. Whatever was waiting in the next lines would change everything again. My eyes clung to the next paragraph, reluctant yet unable to turn away. The air in the room felt denser, charged, as though the very walls were holding their breath. Her name was Evelyn. Just a single sentence, but it echoed like thunder. Evelyn, a name that had never once been spoken in our household, never crossed his lips in 42 years of marriage. A stranger to me, yet suddenly as real as the beating of my own heart. I whispered it aloud, tasting the sound of it on my tongue. Evelyn. The syllables were sharp, unfamiliar, yet filled the air as though they belonged here all along. And with that name, the faceless woman in Harold's memories took on shape, color, and power. She was no longer an abstract regret. She was Evelyn, a person who had lived, loved, and haunted him across decades. The letter pressed on. I told myself it was better not to speak her name, not to let her shadow into our home. But names have a way of living in silence, louder than any sound. Even when I laughed with you, even when I held our children, she was there. Not in place of you, never that, but alongside you, in the spaces you couldn't see. I gripped the letter tighter, my knuckles pale. It was like Harold was peeling back layers of our marriage with every word, showing me the cracks I had never known were there. I felt betrayed, yes, but also strangely drawn closer to him. To know that he had carried Evelyn's name silently, privately, was like glimpsing a map of his soul I had never been allowed to read. My breath came in short bursts as I read further. You must understand, I never spoke her name because I feared it would hurt you, and perhaps, selfishly, because speaking it would make it real again. Silence was my way of control, of keeping her locked in the past. But in truth, silence gave her more power. By hiding Evelyn from the world, I kept her alive inside me. I dropped the paper onto my lap and pressed my palms to my eyes. The thought was unbearable. This Evelyn, this forbidden name, had lived in the quiet corners of my husband's mind while I lay beside him night after night. Every shared smile, every whispered secret between us had existed alongside a memory I never knew. Yet, as the weight of it settled, something unexpected stirred inside me. Curiosity. Who was she? Where had she gone? Did she live a full life, marry someone else, raise children of her own? Or had she carried the same wound Harold did, silently, across decades? I lifted the letter again. Do not think of Evelyn as my betrayal. She was my unfinished chapter. My regret was not that I loved her, but that I lost her. And in losing her, I never forgave myself. That regret has been my prison. And yet, in the end, I found her again. My pulse quickened, and the room tilted slightly. He found her again. My grip on the letter tightened as I read the words over and over. Harold hadn't just remembered her. He had seen her, spoken to her, maybe even touched her. The idea burned inside me. My husband, my Harold, had lived an entire marriage with me only to seek out Evelyn at the end. That was the reason for his final smile. Not the comfort of my hand, not the love of his children gathered around him. It was Evelyn. I staggered to my feet, pacing the room as if I could walk away from the truth. My mind rebelled, flinging excuses at me. Perhaps it wasn't recent. Perhaps he meant something else. Perhaps I had misunderstood. But deep down, I knew Harold's words were clear. He had found her again. I returned to the bed, trembling, and picked the letter back up. When I saw Evelyn once more, I was no longer the boy she knew. I was an old man, worn and failing, but in her eyes, I found the same fire. She forgave me, though I hardly deserved it, and in that forgiveness, I was free. That is why I smiled. The paper slipped from my hands. The tears came again, hot and unrelenting, blurring everything until all I could see was the curve of Harold's lips in the coffin, that haunting, knowing smile. Now I understood. He had smiled not at me, not at our life together, but at Evelyn, at the release her forgiveness gave him. And that knowledge carved a hollow inside me, deeper than any grief. The name Evelyn refused to leave me. It echoed through the hallways of the house, lingered in the corners of my thoughts, and haunted me with every quiet moment. I tried to distract myself with ordinary chores, folding laundry, watering the plants Harold used to care for. But each simple act seemed hollow, overshadowed by the weight of that forbidden name. By the third day, I couldn't endure the silence anymore. I needed to know who she really was. Not just a ghost in Harold's memories, not just ink on a page. Evelyn had been flesh and blood. She had walked somewhere, lived somehow, loved someone, or maybe no one else but Harold. And if she had been important enough to steal his final smile, then I couldn't rest without finding out more. I began with the attic. Dust rose in thick clouds as I pulled down box after box, searching through the archives of our life together. Most held what I expected: Christmas ornaments, old clothes, faded photographs of family trips. But in one box, tucked beneath a stack of financial records, I found an envelope of old black and white photographs. My breath caught. Most of the faces were familiar. Harold's parents, his siblings, a younger Harold smiling at the camera with his crooked grin. But there were also pictures I had never seen before. One in particular stopped me cold. Harold at maybe 20 or 21, his arm casually draped around a young woman with dark hair tied back in a scarf, her smile radiant, her eyes locked on him as though the rest of the world had disappeared. I turned the photo over. Written faintly in pencil were the words, E. Summer, 1962. Evelyn. The photo shook in my hands. This was no phantom, no vague memory Harold had embellished with age. This was real. She had been real, and she had loved him with a gaze so intense it leapt off the photograph, even after all these years. I placed the photo aside, my chest tight, and rifled through the rest. A few more showed her, at a picnic, by the water, always with Harold nearby. Each image was another wound, proof of a love I had never been told about, a story that had existed before mine began. But photographs weren't enough. I needed voices. I needed people who had known Harold then, people who could tell me who Evelyn had really been. So I picked up the phone and called Tom, one of Harold's oldest friends. Tom's voice, raspy with age, cracked with surprise when I asked the question, "Do you remember Evelyn?" There was a long pause on the line. "Yes," he said at last, his tone heavy. "I wondered if you'd ever ask." My breath caught. "So you knew about her?" "Everyone knew," Tom admitted. "Back then, Harold and Evelyn were inseparable. You never saw one without the other. They had that kind of fire, you know, the kind that makes people whisper." His words sliced into me. Fire. whispered about passion. This wasn't just a young man's fling. It had been something unforgettable, something others still recalled decades later. "What happened to her?" I asked, my voice trembling. Another pause. "Life happened. Families, expectations. You know Harold's father. He never would have approved. Evelyn didn't come from the same world. They wanted different things, and the timing." His voice faded into a sigh. "They loved each other, but love wasn't enough. At least not then." I thanked Tom and hung up, my heart pounding. The pieces of the puzzle were forming, but the picture they revealed hurt more than I was ready to admit. That evening, I sat at Harold's desk, spreading out the photos like evidence of a crime. My eyes returned again and again to Evelyn's face, trying to read her expression, to understand the woman who had shaped my husband's heart. I felt jealousy, yes, but also something deeper. Sadness, compassion, even admiration. Because Evelyn had been brave enough to live in Harold's memory all these years, even if she hadn't meant to. And as I stared at her smile in those faded photographs, I realized something chilling. If Harold had found her again before he died, then somewhere, perhaps not far from me, Evelyn still lived. And I had to know what role she played in the smile that carried him into death. The photographs would not leave me alone. Evelyn's smile glowed in them, with a vitality that felt almost unfair, as though she had stepped out of Harold's past to confront me personally. Each image showed something undeniable. They had not been casual companions. They had been deeply, fiercely entwined. I couldn't keep the questions locked inside anymore, so I arranged to meet Tom, Harold's friend, face to face. We met at a small cafe near the church, a quiet place where Harold and I used to have Sunday coffee. The irony stung as I slid into the booth across from Tom, my heart pounding like I was about to uncover something forbidden. Tom looked older than I remembered, lines etched into his weathered face, eyes dulled by years of both wisdom and regret. He stirred his coffee slowly before speaking. "You found out, didn't you?" he said gently. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I pulled the photograph from my bag and slid it across the table. Tom studied it for a moment, then sighed deeply. "I took this picture," he admitted. "That summer, Harold asked me to keep it safe. Said one day he might need to remember what it felt like to be alive." Alive. The word landed in me like a stone. Harold had lived a long, good life with me, yet this picture had captured something he believed represented life itself. "I need to know, Tom," I whispered. "What were they to each other? Was it just young love, or—" Tom's eyes softened with pity. It wasn't just young love. It was the kind of bond people talk about their whole lives. Harold and Evelyn. They lit each other up. When she walked into a room, Harold didn't just notice. He transformed. We all saw it. We all knew. I gripped my cup so tightly it burned my palms. My voice wavered. Then why didn't he choose her? "Because love doesn't always win against life," Tom said quietly. Harold's family expected him to follow a certain path. College, career, marriage within a circle they approved of. Evelyn didn't fit that mold. She was wild, independent, from a working family with no connections. They didn't think she was enough. My chest ached. So he let her go? Tom's gaze fell. Not willingly, he fought for her. I remember the arguments with his father, the sleepless nights. But Harold was torn. He loved Evelyn, but he also feared disappointing everyone else. In the end, he chose duty. And it broke him. I closed my eyes, tears spilling despite my efforts to hold them back. The letter, the smile, the photographs. Suddenly, they all made sense. Harold hadn't simply remembered Evelyn in passing. He had lived with her ghost inside him for decades, carrying the weight of what he lost because he hadn't been brave enough to fight harder. Tom leaned forward. "He never stopped loving you, don't doubt that. But Evelyn was the kind of love that burns once and leaves ashes that last forever. He never let anyone see it, but those of us who were there, we knew." The words sliced through me with a mixture of pain and clarity. Harold had loved me, yes, but differently. I had been his safe harbor, his steady ground. Evelyn had been his fire, the storm that shaped him. And he had smiled at death because in the end, that storm had come back to him. I swallowed hard, my voice breaking. Did Evelyn ever marry? Did she have a family? Tom hesitated. Not that I know of. Last I heard, she stayed in town for a while, working at her father's shop. Then she disappeared. Some said she moved west. Others said she never truly left. I can't tell you for certain, but I do know this. If Harold saw her again, it must have been recent. And it must have mattered. The cafe around us faded into background noise. My entire world narrowed to that one truth. Evelyn had not been a fleeting memory. She had been the great love of Harold's life. And somehow, impossibly, she had returned before the end. I gathered the photograph back into my bag, my hands trembling. Tom's words lingered in the air, impossible to silence, the kind of love people talk about their whole lives. As I walked home, the streets blurred through my tears. For the first time, I understood the depth of Harold's final smile. It was not only a farewell, it was the culmination of a love story I had never been a part of, and I knew I had to uncover the rest. The house became a labyrinth of secrets after my talk with Tom. Every corner seemed to whisper of Evelyn, every drawer a potential hiding place. I couldn't shake the feeling that Harold had left more than one letter behind, that what I had found under his pillow was only the beginning of a trail. Driven by equal parts grief and fury, I began searching. The attic, the desk drawers, even the shoeboxes stacked in our closet, I combed through them all. At first, nothing. Just bills, receipts, and old utility records Harold had never thrown away. But then, behind a stack of yellowing ledgers in his office cabinet, I found a small tin box. Its lid was stiff, the metal cool beneath my fingers. Inside lay a bundle of letters, tied together with twine, so frayed it nearly crumbled when I touched it. My breath caught in my throat. These were not family letters. These weren't notes to me, or the children, or even business papers. The first envelope bore the name Evelyn. My hands shook as I untied the bundle and unfolded the first letter. Dearest Evelyn, I dream of you every night. In my dreams we are still by the water, still laughing, still unbroken. I wake with your name on my lips, and I spend the day swallowing it down. I pressed the paper to my chest, nearly dropping it as the words burned into me. He had written these in silence, carrying the weight of them privately. Love letters that never reached their destination. The next one was dated 5 years after our marriage. Evelyn, I don't know if I'll ever send this. You deserve truth, and yet truth feels cruel. I chose a path away from you, but I have never stopped walking beside your memory. I smile with my wife, I hold our child, but when the night comes, I find myself searching for your face in the dark. Tears blurred the ink. I had been there, in that moment, holding our firstborn, basking in the glow of parenthood, while Harold carried Evelyn's ghost beside us. The revelation shattered something fragile in me. Letter after letter told the same story. Decades of longing poured into pages he never dared send. I see you in every stranger's smile. Sometimes I hear your laugh in the wind, and it breaks me all over again. I wish I could tell you I am happy, but happiness has always been incomplete without you. I dropped the bundle onto the desk, my body shaking with the storm of emotions. Rage flared inside me, rage at Harold for deceiving me, for living a double life within the confines of his heart. But alongside the rage was sorrow, deep and unrelenting. I could feel the rawness of his longing, the way he had carried regret like a wound that never healed. Why had he kept these letters? Why hadn't he destroyed them if he truly wanted to bury the past? A part of me suspected the answer. He couldn't. They were his confessions, the only place where he let the truth breathe. I picked up another letter near the bottom of the stack. This one was dated less than a year before his death. Evelyn, I am old now. My body is failing me, and yet my heart still runs to you. I wonder if you think of me, if you ever smile at the thought of that boy you once loved. If life is kind, perhaps I will see you again before the end. And if not, then know this: I never stopped. I closed my eyes, clutching the paper as if it could tether me to reality. This was no passing memory. Evelyn had been the heartbeat Harold never surrendered. Even at the edge of death, he wrote to her. And then a darker thought crept in, chilling me. If he had seen her again, as he claimed in the letter under his pillow, had he finally delivered these words to her? Had she read them, one by one, and offered him the forgiveness that set him free? The question burned inside me until I could hardly breathe. My hands hovered over the letters, torn between wanting to destroy them and needing to preserve them as evidence of the truth. In the end, I retied the twine and placed the bundle back in the tin box. I whispered into the empty room, "You loved her more than I ever knew. And maybe more than you loved me." The words cut, but saying them aloud felt like admitting a truth I could no longer deny. The tin box still sat on Harold's desk when I unfolded the final letter from under his pillow again. My eyes traced the words I had read before, but now they glowed with a sharper, almost unbearable clarity. I found her again. My breath hitched as I whispered the line aloud. The room seemed to tilt, the air thickening around me. This was no longer about memories, no longer about regrets sealed away in unsent letters. This was something more, something immediate. The next sentences bled into me like fire. It was late last spring. I saw Evelyn in the park, sitting on the same bench where we once dreamed of the world. She was older, yes, but her eyes were the same. They held me, recognized me, forgave me in a single glance. I pressed my hand against my chest, as though to hold my heart steady. He had seen her. After all these years, after decades of silence, Evelyn had returned. And not just returned. She had forgiven him. The letter continued, his words trembling across the page. I approached her slowly, afraid she would turn away. But she smiled, that same fearless smile I remembered from the summer we met. I told her I was sorry. Sorry for the years, for the choices, for the silence. She took my hand and said she had carried her own regrets too. But then she said something that broke me open. "Harold, we were young. We did the best we could." Tears welled in my eyes, hot and relentless. I could see it as though I'd been there. Two old souls, meeting again after lifetimes apart, forgiving each other in the twilight of their days. We walked slowly around the park, talking like no time had passed. She told me about the life she lived. She never married, never had children. She said she had chosen freedom, but freedom was often lonely. I told her about you, about our children, about the family we built. And she smiled and said, "I'm glad you were loved." My chest ached as the image sharpened in my mind. Harold, frail but smiling, Evelyn walking beside him with that quiet strength. It was almost unbearable to imagine my husband sharing such an intimate, soul-deep conversation with another woman while I remained at home, oblivious. But the words on the page refused to soften the blow. When we parted, I thought I might never see her again. But a week later, she appeared at my bedside. She sat with me through long nights when you were asleep. She read aloud the letters I had written but never sent. She forgave me, line by line, word by word. And with every word, I felt the chains fall away. I dropped the letter onto my lap, my entire body trembling. Evelyn hadn't just returned. She had been there, in this very house, in Harold's final days. She had read the letters I had just discovered. She had been part of his death, part of the peace he carried into his final smile. My stomach twisted with betrayal. How could Harold let her into our home without telling me? How could Evelyn sit beside him, touching the pages of their love, while I lay only steps away, blind to it all? Yet even through the sting, I felt something else, an almost reluctant compassion. Harold had lived with regret for so long, and Evelyn, too, had carried her silence. Perhaps at the very end, they had given each other the one thing neither of them could find elsewhere: release. I picked up the letter again, My vision blurred with tears and forced myself to read the final lines. Do not hate her. Do not hate me. If I smiled when I left this world, it was because, at last, the burden was lifted. I loved you, always. But Evelyn was the shadow I could not shake. Now she is no longer a shadow. She is forgiven, and so am I. The paper slipped from my fingers to the floor. My hands covered my face as sobs tore through me. The image of Harold's final smile burned in my mind, no longer a mystery. It was Evelyn's forgiveness, not my love, that carried him peacefully into death. And for the first time since finding the letter, I realized something devastating. I was not the only one who had said goodbye to Harold. Evelyn had too.